Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to be here today in conversation with Mav Block, who is the writer and director of Difference and Repetition 2020, one of the SF Indie feature film selections. Thanks for joining us, Mav.
Thank you for having me.
So, this film, it obviously puts us in a very specific time and a specific place. But I'm hoping you can give us a little bit more detail on how this specific story came to you, what inspired you to want to tell it at that moment in time.
Uh, it was a couple different threads that kind of came together. It started originally with just wanting to make a film about someone who was alone with another person, which of course is how it ends up being in a way about loneliness. And so part of it was that a couple who was married, trapped in the pandemic, and sort of going through turmoil seemed like a very good vehicle for exploring that sensation and that theme. At the same time, I started writing it at the beginning kind of honeymoon period of a relationship. And after writing it, put it down for about a year before I picked it back up and continued revising and then ended up making it. And so I ended up, I guess, almost emotionally throwing in a lot of what I had experienced myself in terms of a tumultuous relationship in the pandemic. Um, and that is maybe the simplest explanation to that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We've seen a lot of work. I mean, I've seen a lot of work of people um, trying to make sense of that specific time and the loneliness attached to that specific time of 2020, the pandemic, lockdown, et cetera. But it strikes me as something that's really challenging to like make art from. And your film is so artful, it's so creative. Um, and I'm just curious about like that yeah, like how you were able to find like fruitful creative juices during this period of like intense loneliness and when everything was so unknown. Like, did you find that challenging or did you find that the ideas just came to you?
So I guess I can say two things. One is about the pandemic in the film, which is that just it's very much background, like it's a matter of circumstance rather than a theme, which made that aspect easier. Just in the sense that it's like if there had not been a pandemic to have this particular kind of story, I would have needed to invent something like it or some reason that could actually trap two people alone in one place for long enough. And so the pandemic formed more like just a or an event like it possibilities of condition for this kind of story. The same thing would be possible if there were bombs flying elsewhere and someone had to shelter for weeks, but it allowed for that. And then for me, the I guess because of whatever it I mean, the beginning of the pandemic for the first few months were very challenging, but then it became, I wouldn't say social, but that's the thing about actually getting into a relationship during the pandemic is that it became the kind of the opposite of isolation, but things were very accelerated because you're spending all your time with another person because there's nothing you can possibly do in the world because everything is closed and everyone else is isolating. And so that maybe made it easy in a sense in the beginning, but that part of the question is harder to answer. I think.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think we'll probably have a bunch of perspective on it in like 20 years.
Oh yes.
Um, but yeah, no, that closed in feeling, that intimate feeling is something that's so well captured in the film. And I'm curious, like how you selected your actors, and then just how you worked with them to create that sense of sort of like being trapped in this house with them. Yeah, how did you work on that intimacy with them?
So for the main actors who were in the image, because overall there were four actors involved, Renato Rueda, who played Marcelo, Elisa Tanaud, who was Sylvia on screen, and then Lou Celestino and Valentina Clotet, who did Sylvia's voices and voiceovers and singing. Um, so I started casting originally via like initial auditions via Zoom before going down to Peru, and then did some pretty intensive callbacks to figure out who could essentially exist in space. So almost like taking people through an acting exercise for an hour where they had to bring in activities. I had planted things around an apartment and they had to essentially live as the character in space with me occasionally whispering directions or adjustments into their ear. And that's something that's ultimately hard for a lot of people to do, including actors, because you start performing emotions or something instead of just living. And Lisa, needless to say, didn't do this at all. And that is one thing that she was absolutely brilliant at. And that is, I think, what contributed most to, I guess, this intimate feeling of just seeing someone existing as opposed to seeing someone performing the emotions you would expect from them at a time like that. And then it was actually when we were having no luck finding a Marcelo that Elisa suggested that we bring in Renato, who came in 2 hours after receiving sides and just performed beautifully off the bat.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was going to ask you if there was any time for like rehearsals or anything, because you really buy them as people who've known each other for a long
Oh,
time. And
oh no! So there were rehearsals. There were
okay,
there were pretty extensive rehearsals in addition to there being rehearsals on location. Since we had the location completely on lock, the house itself, the architect of it was actually one of the producer's uncles. Um,
cool.
and so, yeah, like even we had rehearsals there a week before shooting started. I lived at the location for a week before we started shooting by myself. And so we were able to go through a lot of things so that when we got to set, we could kind of play a little bit more.
The house is so cool, for lack of a better word. It's and it's such a plays such a big part in the film too. Was since you lived there for a week, were there like ideas in the story or the scenes that were coming to you as you were sort of like in a physical space that like did the physical space, I guess, like determine some of the way the film ended up?
Some of the shots and maybe some of the story, yes. I mean, when I even first saw photos of the house, I knew that the first thing I needed was a scene that would be shot from the back, like when she's dancing through the house. That was the moment I saw the house, I knew I needed to do that. Um, a lot of shot ideas that came while living there, and then even things kind of improvised on set or during shooting because all of us lived in that either in that house or the house next door or in that compound during shooting. Like every single pine tree shot was just a decision made on set. Even the addition of the shot of the two shots of her counting the pills on the bathroom floor, those scenes were completely made up literally on the last day. So there was this more, it's like there was a kind of core story or outline, and then there was a good deal of improvising and grabbing whatever seemed like it might be interesting or useful in editorial. And because I knew that I was going to be dubbing the film and recording voiceover, and so I mean that meant that everything to a certain degree was very very flexible, and I wanted to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the dubbing and the voiceover. That's so it feels so like intricately done. Can you talk about how you came up with that idea and then how you executed it in more detail?
Yeah. So the idea came just because I thought that at least when I remember something, it's there's not exactly a strict synchronicity between sight and sound in my head, and so I thought that if I were doing it for real, it should be dubbed, and likewise with voiceover, that there should be some kind of play between that. And I did not totally grasp what that would mean practically when I made that decision, of course. But so it really worked out that there were almost like two phases of production. There was production of the site, and then there was production of the sound, which also overlapped a lot with editorial. Like there were multiple rounds of ADR recordings, multiple rounds of voiceover recordings, even parts of Foley were done before there was picture lock. And so it was I don't know, I could describe the post part then as much more like working with this material that was already shot and recording and re-recording and re-recording and trying to form it into something in kind of a more plastic way than at least I experienced with, I don't know, editing my shorts, where it was much more just trying to assemble something according to the rubric of the original idea.
So cool, so creative. Um, I want to ask you about language, and I'm always really fascinated by filmmakers who incorporate like different languages in their film, whether it's like, is it written that way in the script? Did you kind of like have conversations with the actors in terms of like when these actors would slip into English or slip into Spanish or how language sort of played a part in how they communicate. That might also be related to the repetition aspect of the film and the way the language is used. So yeah, if you could speak a little bit to that.
So it's hard to speak about the initial because one thing I'll say is that the script changed in basic ways. It stayed in the most basic elements. It stayed the same, but a lot of the particulars changed a lot over time because of how flexible post production was in this way of filmmaking. Um, but it was more just thinking about who Sylvia was speaking to at any particular moment in time. Like the Zoom class is obviously in English because she's a student at Columbia, but then switches to Spanish to speak with Marcelo when he interrupts. But then also thinking about like when someone with who is bilingual in a sense will switch between languages. So like going into the actual repetition sequence of you're overreacting. It's like there's an idiom that is the language switch from Spanish to English. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, which as a translation, it does not exist as an idiom like that in Spanish, and so that is what then motivates that switch to English. Then there's the other aspect of language with, I guess, one of the main themes, which is that loneliness, at least in the way that we understand it, is a very Anglo word and concept for which there really are no great translations. I mean, obviously, it is used, people use other words like in Spanish. The most common word used for loneliness would be la soledad, which of course also means solitude. So, like in the citation from Arendt that I incorporate, loneliness is not solitude. Um, if you were to put that into Google Translate, it would come back la soledad no es la soledad. um, and so there's also, I guess, this element of kind of pushing against the boundaries of language and different languages to communicate things, which also cuts both ways in terms of some of the Spanish in particular. Like I would say, it is hard in translation to communicate the force of Marcelo talking about the other Sylvia, who'll spend the rest of her life watching a film of herself, from Spanish to English, simply because we can't use remain the same way they can use quedarse as a verb. And so I think part of it, for me on both ends, was this just kind of play with ideas in language that can occur in I don't know, this type of situation.
Yeah, I want to go, yeah, back to the kind of essential story of this couple, sort of the unraveling of this couple during this time. Um, because again, that intimacy comes through so well. The actors do such a good job of really bringing you into that heartbreak and the frustration that goes into that. I'm just curious now that it's been out a little bit. I know it's been on the festival circuit for a bit. Like, have you found that people have been resonating with like specific aspects of the story, or what has the sort of reaction been like from that?
The reaction has been good, and the I guess one reaction that stuck with me the most was someone who referred to it as almost like defining the idea of relationship as self, um, which is I think what has or that I don't know about the idea, but the sensation of that is maybe what's come across most of sort of two people who had something together but are so pushed together by this circumstance that the absence of almost any space between them whatsoever drives them to madness and to ruin because in because they are not so solid and because there is no space that can separate them, it's almost like they're pretending at some idea of a relationship or of a marriage or of a future that really can be nothing more than a fantasy. And they've just invested so much of their own selves in it that it becomes something impossible to let go of until it basically destroys them. And so I think that's probably I hope what's come across most. I think what's come across most.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like not something that a lot of people can necessarily articulate unless they are in that situation where you're like trapped together, which, as you said at the beginning of the conversation, could happen in, any number of situations.
yes.
Um, but it's always surprising feeling that way. Okay, lastly, I want to ask you about the title,
Oh,
Difference in Repetition 2020. Obviously, we recognize
there's
the
part.
themes, but I'm just curious how you landed on that title. And
Oh.
yeah.
There's like a little piece of me that regrets that title. Originally, it's called Sylvia at Home, but that doesn't translate well. And then also the first lines of dialogue in it over the credits are Sylvia, Sylvia. And so I decided that calling it Sylvia would just be a waste of text. Um, it came out of set. um, I caught myself always saying to DP to Julian that basically our principles with shots are difference and repetition. Like, and that is sort of how it goes, both in terms of story, in terms of editing, but especially also in terms of shots. That it is like there's a lot of repetition, but each time it is always a little different reframe change to articulate something else. Um, Similarly, the 2020 was almost a narrative ploy to try to get that out of the way up front, but also to frame it like a little bit like the title of an artwork in a way, or to kind of help create the idea that it's something that you were going to look at and absorb, but almost engage in a different way than a more regular traditional dramatic story. And in that sense, I thought that would make sense that sort of like if you go to a museum or a gallery, it's, whatever the title is, comma, the year. And then the last thing is that I once loved and now have beef with philosopher Deleuze, um, whose books on cinema really piss me off. And the book that made him famous is called Difference in Repetition. And so part of it was just me being maybe a little childish too.
I love that. Very different reasons, but they all
Yeah,
came together. Well, congratulations on the film. It's so creative, so moving, and just really, really beautiful. So thank you for sharing it with us. And
of
yeah,
course. Thank you so much
wonderful.
for having it.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks everyone at home for watching.
Thank you.